जनरल सेक्रेटरी जम्मू आपको मिला था दिल्ली में।
तो पहले तो संतों जी जो यहाँ पधारे हैं और फिर मंच पे भारत तिब्बत संघ के नेतृत्व और यहाँ जम्मू कश्मीर के जम्मू की यूनिवर्सिटी के डीन और संस्कृति यूनिवर्सिटी के प्रोफेसर और आप सबको सब हिमालय क्षेत्र से आप आए हुए हैं और हमारे तरफ से आप सबको नमस्कार। Now, since Chinese propaganda, जो चीन जो बोलते हैं तिब्बती के इतिहास के ऊपर, it's all so strong and so pervasive. Many people around the world believe that Tibet must be or must have been a part of People's Republic of China. But of course, People's Republic of China came only in 1949. Or some think that Tibet must have been part of China since antiquity, as China says. Now they use the word antiquity or they use the word time immemorial. Now when is अब वो time immemorial कब से शुरू करो, कब से खेती करना शुरू करो, ये भी problem है एक. So earlier they used to say Tibet was a part of China since 7th century. This, I think, Professor also touched on this when he talked about how Buddhism traveled to Tibet. Then Chinese said Tibet began 7th century only because the Tibetan emperor had a Chinese wife and a Nepalese wife. So in that sense, Tibet should be part of Nepal also, just because we had a princess as wife of King Tsering at that time. So there's no justification to that. They were not able to prove that. Next, that they come to 13th century. 13th century was when we established our relationship again with the Mongols. It was not Chinese. So there also they couldn't prove it. Now they were talking about earlier 18th century. So all these, they could not prove it. Now they went back to antiquity since time immemorial. I think Professor also touched a little bit on how Buddhism traveled out of India. There was also Kanishka's time, 2nd, 3rd century. Then there was Ashoka's time and all that. But Buddhism traveled to China much before it came to in Tibet. So in 3rd, 4th century. In Tibet, Professor referred to King Songtsen Gampo, 7th century, where King Songtsen Gampo sent one of his disciples to invent a new language for Tibet. And there are different versions, but we say it's Devanagari script. So even now, if I pronounce Tibetan alphabets, you will know how close it is to India. Because in Hindi, it's ka, kha, kha, ga, nga, cha, cha, cha. So in Tibetan, if I pronounce all the 10 consonants, you will know ka, kha, kha, nga, cha, 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 nya, ta, tha, tha, na, pa, 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 ma, sa, sa, za, wa, sha, sa, a, ya, ra, la, sha, sa, ha, a. So this is Tibetan consonant. You can see it's very similar to Hindi, present-day contemporary Hindi. And we have only 4 vowels. You have many vowels, A, E, E, U. We have only E, U, A, O, only 4 vowels. So many Indians don't know that Tibetan language also came from India in 7th century. Then, as Professor referred to, Buddhism actually started beginning, we started to teach Buddhism only in 8th century. It was introduced in 7th century during Songtsen Gampo's time, but the actual preaching of Buddhism started only after Shantarakshita's visit to Tibet in 8th century. So Shantarakshita was very wise. He was quite old also when he was abbot of the Nalanda University in India. And then he advised the Tibetans, since you already have your language, instead of me teaching you Sanskrit and then learning Buddhism, why don't you translate all the Sanskrit books into Tibetan? So that is why we must have had the biggest transliteration house in the world in 8th century, because we translated everything from Sanskrit to Tibetan. So that is also the reason why we say that we are a repository of one part of ancient Indian wisdom. And even now, His Holiness keeps saying, I am a messenger of ancient Indian wisdom. So India is very big. India is a home to many philosophies, many religions. That's why His Holiness always says, Indians are very brainy. So India has a lot of brain from ancient times, from Rigveda times. Now, Tibetan history, according to us Tibetans, we have a recorded history of more than 2,200 years. And there were a lineage of Tibetan kings starting from that time. I think Professor referred also to the Kauravas during the Mahabharata. Some say that a defeated Kaurava prince came to Tibet. And he pointed when Tibetans, because Tibetans don't understand Indian language, at that time there was no language also in that sense in Tibet. So they asked where you came from, and the person pointed in the sky. And so the pre-Buddhist religion called Pon, they believe in all this nature. So they thought that he must have descended from the sky. So the link between India and Tibet, the first king of Tibet, who was carried on the throne of the shoulders by the Tibetans, that is why he is called Nya Ti. Nya is shoulder, Ti is throne. So he was taken like that. So we believe that the first king of Tibet also came from India. So that is how deep-rooted our relationship with India is. So between 7th to 9th century, Tibet was a big empire in Central Asia. So Tibet was also known alongside Chinese and Mongols as big power centers in Central Asia. Because many people don't know, they don't look at, many years back I met one Pakistani and he said, oh, Tibet must be small like Bhutan. Because people don't know how big Tibet is. We have border between India and Tibet from Jammu Kashmir to Arunachal Pradesh. So that itself is the extent of Tibet's length from east to west. Then you can imagine how big Tibet is. So we call ourselves in our prayers, Khangri Rave Kowe Shingham, which means the land surrounded by snow mountain ranges. Because we are surrounded by Himalayas in the south, Karakoram in the west, and so many mountain ranges on the east end, because it slopes down when it goes towards the east and the north. Right? And by 1906, that is the first book I saw, that the Westerners started calling Tibet as the roof of the world. Because Tibet's altitude is about 12,000 feet above sea level. So when I was in Europe or when I go to Japan, when I speak to school children there, I tell them, what is your highest mountain? In Japan, it's Mount Fuji. Mount Fuji is about 3,700, 3,800 meters, which is almost equal to 12,000 feet. So I told them, so that the children don't forget how high Tibet is, that your Mount Fuji, the highest in your country, is like base camp in Tibet. Because if you have to still climb up, you have to climb another 6,000 feet above sea level. Then, now Asians refer to Tibet as the water tower of Asia, because everything originates from there. All the major rivers in 10 different countries originate from there. And the Chinese environmental scientists now call Tibet as the third pole, North Pole, South Pole, and Tibet Pole, because Tibet has the largest amount of glaciers and permafrost that feeds all these major rivers. So going back to history, we were a big empire between 7th and 9th century. Then we started collapsing. Tibet became disintegrated for almost 400 years, up to mid 13th century. Then our relationship with the Mongols started. With Sakya Pandita Kunga Gyaltseng, a well-known scholar of the Sakya tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, was taken as the preceptor of the Mongol Khans, so which is the 5th Khan, the Kublai Khan. He succeeded Mongke Khan, the 4th Khan, okay, from Genghis Khan onwards. So Kublai Khan had relation with the Tibetans much before he invaded China. So after Kublai Khan invaded China, then it became the Yuan dynasty in China. So Yuan is only that period of Mongol rule in China. But the Mongols were there even before the Yuan and even after the Yuan. Right? But for the Chinese, it's only that period, up to 1368, from mid-13th century to little after mid-14th century. Then, from 1368 to 1644 was the Ming Empire of China. Mings are the real Chinese, Han Chinese. So, from 1368 to 1644, we didn't have much relationship with the Chinese. Chinese had one dynasty. We had 3 hegemonies in those 300 years of history. We had the Pamudrupa that succeeded the Sakyapas. Then there were the Rinpopas for about 100 years. Then there was the Devasangpa for almost 100 years before the 5th Dalai Lama took over the reins of political and administrative responsibilities, both political and spiritual leadership of Tibet. So the 5th Dalai Lama had already taken over the reins of Tibet in 1642, whereas the Qing dynasty, Qings are Manchus, not Chinese. They took over only in 1644, 2 years after the 5th Dalai Lama took over the political and temporal leadership of Tibet. So there is no way that China can claim its sovereignty or its control over Tibet historically. So from 5th Dalai Lama onwards to the 14th Dalai Lama, we continued. And you know what happened since 1949 when China started invading Tibet from the east. And then we were forced to sign this 17-point agreement. And then we had to come into exile in 1959. But there was a lot of course, this conference is happening in the shadow of what China is doing in Tawang right now, or just a few days ago, or what had happened, or what is ongoing in Ladakh, and what were the problems in Doklam and other areas where, as of today, India enjoys border with China. So till Chinese occupation of Tibet, there has never ever been a war between India and China because they never shared a boundary. So historically, we were an independent state and we were the buffer between the 2 most populous nations in the world. So this is a little bit about Tibetan history. So if you want to read more, There are many histories written by Tibetan historians. There are Tibetan histories written by Western historians. There are also Chinese propaganda materials about Tibetan history. And in the last 2 years, two gentlemen, one a Westerner by name Michael van Walt van Praag, he wrote a book called Tibet Brief 2020. So if you look at the cover of the book, it'll look like you're going to an eye clinic because the wordings are small and blurry at the beginning and then becomes clear, 2020, which means you see that Tibetan's international community does not know much about Tibetan history. And after his studies, because the approach that he adopted in doing his research was about 8 years of work with some 70, 80 scholars from Central Asia, not depending only on Chinese history, because unfortunately, the Western nations depend on China for Asian history as the main source, which is a big fallacy, right? So he did that, and he proves conclusively that whether it's Tibet's relationship with the Mongols from 1254 to 1368, or Tibet's relationship with the Mings from 1368 to 1644, or the Tibetans' relation with the Qings, the Manchus. If you watch Kung Fu movies, present-day Kung Fu movies, you will see that Chinese societal perspective of Manchus are not Chinese. That's why in Kung Fu movies, you will see the Chinese as protagonists and Manchus as antagonists. Sab daku bante hain Manchus. So this is a societal perspective of Chinese, that Manchus are not Chinese. Right? So our relationship with Qing, or as per international law today, Tibet has never been considered part of China. This is a book that came 2 years ago, and China has not responded to this book because there's no way they can respond historically. Right? Now there is another book by Professor Lau Han Tin, who used to be a professor of economics in the City University of Hong Kong. Now he's retired and he lives in San Diego. He has written a book, but he adopted a completely different approach. He didn't refer to any other history of Central Asia. He referred only to imperial historical Chinese records from the Yuan to Ming to Qing to present-day history. And he conclusively proves that the imperial Chinese records never considered Tibet as part of China. So these two books, now China is no position to answer on these historical facts. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when he was put this precondition by the Chinese government that His Holiness should say that Taiwan is part of China or Tibet is part of China, His Holiness said, I'm a simple Buddhist monk. So as a Buddhist monk, he cannot lie and say that Tibet is part of PRC. No way. So that is why always, as always, His Holiness always has wise answers, and he said, I'm not a historian. Let us leave history to historians. What is more important is the future of the Tibetan people, future of the Chinese people. So on that basis, His Holiness adopted the middle way approach, because some might think that, oh, His Holiness stepped down a lot. But that's also because the reality of the situation inside Tibet is so severe that we are dying a slow death. We didn't experience the kind of concentration camps on an industrial scale, state-engineered project. But we are dying a slow death. People often ask as to why we don't hear from Tibet anymore. That is because if you have read the book called 1984 by George Orwell, written sometime in 1949 or 59, I don't remember which of these, but George Orwell's book is coming into reality in China today. Orwellian gridlock system talks about state controlling every single citizen and their activities. And this is exactly what is happening in China, including Tibet. If Saraswati Ji is my friend, Saraswati Ji is my friend, he lives in capital Lhasa and I live in rural area. if I go to Lhasa, either I'll have to stay with him or I stay in a hotel. If I live with him, I have to be, he has to make sure that I don't get involved in any political activities because his whole family is going to suffer because of my political action. So that is the gridlock system. 158 Tibetans have self-immolated so far. Way back in 1963, when one Vietnamese monk self-immolated, Vietnam issue became a global issue. 1968, when one Czech person self-immolated, that increased the profile of the Czech people and their resistance. Now, even after 158 self-immolations in Tibet, it's not like Tibetans don't have the heart to kill other Chinese. They can kill. But because of His Holiness' advice that we should not involve in violence, so you are crossing this very thin line between violence and non-violence, which is self-immolation. Because in Buddhism, what matters is motivation behind your action. So these 158 Tibetans self-immolated, hoping against hope that the Chinese government will pay some attention to their plight, or hoping against hope that the international community will come to their rescue. But unfortunately, it has not resulted in the way that they imagined. But I believe that all the efforts will not go into waste or not go in vain. All this will multiply, it will have its impact. So this is the kind of gridlock system that Chinese government is issued. That's why people are not able to do anything. So apart from the physical relationships that we are talking about, now Chinese government is very good in using all kinds of artificial intelligence to control Tibetans, whether it's in the form of electronic identification cards, or whether it's in the form of geolocation, or whether it's in the form of DNA collection of Tibetans, now which is becoming very, very sophisticated. Now the latest report that came out about few days ago is that Chinese government is collecting iris scan of all the Tibetans. So all these will be used in controlling people, in surveilling people. So there's no way that Tibetans are able to do anything. That is also the reason why you don't hear much about what is happening inside Tibet. And they don't allow any people. Not on, here we are talking about Kailash Mansarovar, which should be a natural access for Indians to go on pilgrimage. But forget that. They are not allowing people to go into Tibet. That is why countries like the United States government has a law called the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act. Because diplomacy is based on reciprocity, right? If a Chinese person has a visa to come to India, he or she can travel to any part of India unless very restricted zones in the border areas, which is again created by the Chinese themselves. But if an Indian has a visa to go to China, you can go to China, but to go to Tibet, you have to have another visa, another permit. You know, that is why United States Congress moved this act called the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act. It's called RATA Act. Because US is the only government that has a law on Tibet, the US Tibet Policy of 2002, which has now been amended to Tibet Support and Policy Act, where the administration has to report, whether it's the White House, the President's office, or the State Department has to report to the Congress every year on the status of negotiation and human rights inside Tibet. So those kind of mechanisms are useful sometimes to put pressure on the Chinese government. Now, based on these realities of history, when we reach out to the international community, now we tell them that if you repeat this statement that Tibet is part of People's Republic of China at the behest of the Chinese government, you're going against international law. आप अंतर्राष्ट्रीय नियम के खिलाफ जा रहे हैं. That is because we have only one agreement with People's Republic of China. That is the 1951 17-point agreement. May 1951. But Chinese attacked Tibet since 1949, but the final straw was 1950 October, attack on Chamdo by defeating the Tibetan army. So under international law, any agreement post-aggression is null and void. It's not acceptable. It's not considered legal. So in that sense, if international law has to be applied, Tibet cannot be an exception. International law also has to be applied to Tibet. That is one thing we tell the international community. Second thing we tell the international community is, on the one hand, on the orders of Chinese government, you keep repeating this statement that Tibet is part of PRC, and on the other hand, you keep saying that you support negotiation between His Holiness the Dalai Lama's representatives and the Chinese leadership. Now we tell them these two don't go together. These are contradicting each other. That is because China rules Tibet with an iron hand inside. Outside, they force all other nations to say that Tibet is part of PRC. And the international community also did that. You know, it's more like giving a blank check to the Chinese government saying, you do whatever you want in Tibet, we don't care. Just as what's happening in Ukraine now, right? So, because of this position, there is no reason for China to come and talk to us, because they are controlling Tibetans inside Tibet, and the whole international community accepts China's rule over Tibet. But I remind the international community that you have no right to give this legitimacy for China to rule over Tibet. If anybody can give that legitimacy, it can be His Holiness the Dalai Lama or the Tibetan people, no one else. Again, the question is, how many of the people in foreign offices around the world have read Tibetan history to say that with conviction that Tibet was a part of PRC? Then I put them one question. I have traveled around the world. Many of you have traveled around the world. Even if we have not traveled, we know what's happening around the world. Now that the communication has improved so much, we tell them, okay, there are so many countries in this world who invaded another country. Do you still have a case like Tibet where an invading country tells all other nations around the world to ask them to say that this is part of us because we have invaded it? You don't hear that. Even within China, Chinese government don't ask other governments to say that Manchuria is part of China, or Mongolia is part of China, or East Turkestan is part of China. I refuse to use this word Xinjiang, because this is the name given by Chinese government for East Turkestani people, for the Uyghur people. Even for the Tibetans, they are trying to use the Chinese word called Xizang. Chinese call Tibet as Xizang, but unfortunately they are not very successful. They start by beginning, they synthesize everything, including names of places. Now, if you go on Google and look at Arunachal Pradesh from a Chinese perspective, they have already named places in Arunachal Pradesh in Chinese to claim that it is their own. Yeah, so these are, I think, important messages. Now we tell the international community to contain China, because you're all responsible for creating that. I told the media also, with India also, I think India will have to rethink on their business with China. How did China become strong? Because China has all this $1 trillion reserve of foreign exchange that all other countries invest and give it to them. Our friend in Ladakh, our environmental friend, he gave a very simple and short message to Indians. The Chinese make money out of India and then fight against the Indians. Is that really what you want? You give money to China so that China can fight against you? Look at the statistics. how much is China importing from India? And how much is India importing from China? It's almost 1/3. India's import is 1/3 of China's total export. And there are very few countries in this world who has a surplus of trade with China, including Australia. All other countries run deficit with China. And we still, I was in the United States when President Trump was the president. Despite all the rhetoric, business has not been going down. So if the business keeps on going as it is, then there's no reason for China to worry, because they're getting what they want. Now, on October 16th, when the party Congress happened, and on that day when President Xi Jinping reiterated his position on Taiwan and zero COVID, I said he is digging his own grave if he continues with the zero COVID policy. Because if anything can bring down the Communist Party in China, it will be economics. It will be business. So everybody should know where it hurts. If you have to strike, you have to strike at places where it hurts. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to hit anything. Therefore, it's very important for, I'm very thankful to Bharat Tibet Sangh. We have quite a large network of Tibetan supporters in India, and last month we were there in Delhi to attend the All India Tibet Support Group, and I was very, very encouraged to see the kind of people who are now getting involved. So now we have Kavis also involved in this. So this is, I think, here also in this very distinguished gathering, we always had military people with us, whether it's Major General Saab here or any other military, because they know, they've seen, they know the history, and they know what is happening on the border, how China's belligerence is creating problems for India, and that too unprovoked, right? And we have a lot of friends in the Himalayan region. Even here, most of the attendees are from the Himalayan region. I think the awareness also needs to go to other parts of India who are not directly impacted by the conflicts. So to South India, Central India also, I think we have to. That's why I offered my services, because that is also my job, to speak to university students wherever is possible, if you're able to organize one, so that we can tell them the Tibet story and how connected it is for our benefit. So I think Major General Saab also mentioned about the colonial boarding schools, colonial style boarding schools. Now, if you point that out to the Chinese government, they point fingers at the United States government and say, how did you treat your native people? How did you treat your First Nation people? Or if in case of Australians, they ask, how did you treat your Aborigines? Or the Maoris in New Zealand. Even Swedish, when I was there 2 months ago, Swedish was telling me that the Chinese are accusing them on how they treat their own people in the northern belt. There are minorities in the northern belt, in the whole of Scandinavia. So those, which means to say that Chinese leadership knew that what had happened in history is wrong, but they keep on insisting to do the same things which the colonialists used. Right? And this, I think, also spells a lot of security signals. Because as Tibetans, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we had a lot of respect for the land and people of India, because we call India the Aryavrat. In Tibetan, we call it the Jaga Phagbe Yu. It's the land of our masters. Whatever we are studying in Tibet is all because of the compositions of Indian masters. So we have so much respect, and that respect is reflected in people's mindset. That is why you have a very favorable relationship or favorable view towards India. Now, what China is trying to do now is to turn every single young Tibetan into Chinese mentally. So that way, India will be in a disadvantage, because the mental equation of the younger generation of Tibetans, if it is driven away from the matrix of favoring China towards favoring Tibet towards against China, it's bad for them. So they are now trying this strategy to change people's minds so that Indian and Tibetans also. Now we are hearing so many different kind of stories. Chinese government asking Indian government not to be close to United States. And China always talk about not interfering in internal matters. Whereas they interfere in internal matters of all other countries. And China is quite a paradox. Just a few days ago, when President Xi Jinping visited Saudi, he talked about Palestine and its position, China's position on Palestine. Now, if China is really concerned about Palestine, why don't it resolve its own problems in their own country? With the Tibetans, with the Mongols, with the Uyghurs, with the Hong Kongers. That's why I say, people now, during this time, many people ask, why is China being unprovoked belligerents on India and all that? I think General Saab also referred to that we sense a lot of insecurity. Outwardly, people might feel that China is very strong, militarily, politically, economically. All these are coming from economics. If you don't have money, there is nothing to spend, so there's no other power. The only power that they lack is moral power. Nobody trusts them. Right? So, I also tell the international community that it is the international community, particularly the developed countries, who created this monster called China today. I say you don't have to read too many books. You just read one book called Kissinger on China, because Henry Kissinger is credited with opening up China to the rest of the world during Nixon's time in '72. And read his book and you will know that when China is dwindling, when China is falling apart, it's always the West who supported China. It's the West who gave all this technology, or whether it's transferred or whether it's stolen, it's a different thing. The Chinese are very good in stealing things, right? So it is United States, it's the European Union. When I went to Japan also, I told them, it's your government also. Even now they have a lot of investment. Even Taiwan has a lot of investment in China. So it's all of us who created this monster called China today. So you can't rely only on United States to expect them to contain China. That's why we also appeal to the Europeans that it should be a cooperation and collaboration of transatlantic nations. Not just, you can't expect United States to contain China alone by itself. And they will have to work with other liberal democracies around the world to contain China. Otherwise, it has become difficult. And we also tell the world community that don't look at us only from the perspective of a victim of communist China. If you learn to look at us as partners in bringing about positive changes in China, because to bring positive changes in China, you need both internal forces and external forces. And the internal forces are the Tibetans, the Mongols, the Uyghurs, the Hong Kongers. You can also include Taiwanese into this. So if that is the approach, then I'm sure there will be many more things that can work together. I'm not very happy with the European Union. 27 different countries. They don't have a coherent foreign policy. Now when I travel around, I realize that every single country is developing their own China strategy or China policy or Indo-China policy. If they are not united, China will use it against them, just as the colonialists during their times use it against the colonists. China uses the same method, divide and rule, carrot and stick. If Germany doesn't listen, they go to Italy. If Italy doesn't listen, they go to France. So unless Europe has a coherent economic and a foreign policy, they will not be able to handle China. It's going to be very difficult. And countries like Switzerland has extradition treaty with China. And when I met with their people, I told them, what is it for? Who is it for? Do you have a Swiss person who committed crime in Switzerland and wanted to flee to China to be extradited back to them? Or a Swiss national committing crime in Switzerland and fleeing to China to be extradited back to Switzerland? I don't think so. It's the Chinese government who wants the Uyghurs and Hong Kongers to be repatriated back. And so also Portugal and Czech Republic have also signed the extradition treaty. Now they are trying to do away with it. Just yesterday or day before, Czech Republic made sure that the police station set up by the Chinese government on a foreign soil in some 21 different countries, Denmark has decided to push them out. Right? Czech Republic just decided that they're going to, the two stations, police stations that the Chinese government had established in other countries. It's unimaginable. No other country has done that in any other country, and Chinese are doing that. There were a lot of questions from Pakistan and Bhutto and all that this morning from the press. I'm more worried about the Pakistanis, because they call the relationship higher than the skies, deeper than the sea, sweeter than honey, so many expressions like that. But ultimately, it's Pakistani people who are going to suffer because of China, because of their relationship with China. Because when I was in Thailand one time, I was reading a local newspaper and they were talking about the Belt and Road Initiative, where China is not asking for the land to lay the track alone. They are talking about 50 meters on both sides of the railway track. So from Thailand, capital of Thailand, to the border or Kunming or wherever that railway station is, if you have to spare 50 meters on both sides of the road, how much land are Chinese going to take over? And China's debt economy we are seeing in Pakistan, we saw in Sri Lanka. Cambodia is almost 40% into China's debt. Laos has always been under them. They have not much choice. So now we'll have to look at Burma as to what happens there, So all these issues need to be taken. Particularly, I decided to put this from Assam, keep it here, because we were there in Assam last month, and now we are in Jammu, so from east to west. And what was very, very, apart from what has been reported in the press, what was very, very clear to us when we flew in the helicopter from Meo to Pasighat and Pasighat to Tuting, because when you go towards that road, the helicopter goes over the Brahmaputra river. So Brahmaputra is muddy. It's not rainy season. The river is not in spate. It's not in flood conditions. But it's like tea, muddy. Whereas the tributaries that are joining this main river are clear sky blue, very clear. And this has been happening since 2017. It's not for 1 or 2 days or 1 or 2 months. So which indicates that there is a lot of work going on Brahmaputra inside Tibet. And there are many reports of Chinese wanting to build a dam that is twice the size of Three Gorges Dam, which is the biggest in the world. And this new dam on Mathok, on the Brahmaputra at the Great Bend, is supposed to generate 3 times electricity more than Three Gorges. So if it can produce that much energy, you can think about the storage of water upstream and how much biodiversity is going to be destroyed because of this. But biodiversity is a small issue. If in future, because we all know that this Gondwana and the Asian plate got together and the Himalaya came up, and the whole Himalayan region is a seismic zone. Now, if something happens to the size of that dam in Tibet because of natural disasters, then what will happen to people living on the basins of the Brahmaputra? They'll all be washed away. There will be unimaginable human crisis, catastrophe, and devastation. Chinese themselves have seen it on the Yangtze. You know, rivers, Tibetan rivers flowing from Jammu Kashmir into Pakistan, into India, into Nepal, into Burma, the Irrawaddy, the Mekong going into Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia, these 5 different places. And the 2 main lifeline of China flow from Tibet. The Yellow River flows from my father's region. And that is the cradle of Chinese civilization. And that caters to the northern part of China. And the Yangtze, which flows through the southern part of China, we witnessed a few months ago, the level of Yangtze went down by 50%. It did not become navigable. It did not produce hydroelectricity during that period. So you can imagine the kind of destruction that was brought on this river way back in 1998. And that was the first time that Chinese government started to give some importance on Tibet's environment. So it's high time our friends and our supporters in Assam are working really hard to bring out the importance of Brahmaputra and the Chinese plan in that region and how it's going to impact them. Because China wants to use Tibet like a water tap. If they have less, they stop the water tap, build the dam. And on Mekong, even before it goes into Burma, we are talking about 32 dams minimum. Then you can imagine how many they are going to plan on Tsangpo, or the Brahmaputra, or the Sikyong, as you say, call in Assam. And these are going to have very, very serious consequences for India. And I also urge the Southeast Asian countries to raise their voices, because in future, war could happen because of water and food. Some estimate that about 1.8 billion people out of the 8 billion people in the world have something or the other to do with rivers that originate from Tibet. And the rivers that flows into the riparian downstream countries are some of the most densely populated areas in the world. So which is going to create severe food shortages in future if water hydrological data are not shared or transboundary water sharing agreements are not reached. This will have serious problem. So I'm just giving one example of how Tibet's environment also impacts, because Tibet is very high and the jet streams that flow over Tibet also impacts the weather conditions in India, including monsoon fall. So if something drastic happens on Tibet's environment and its fragile economy, it's going to have serious consequences in the whole region. So it's not only for the Tibetans, it's not a political issue also. But who's talking about Tibet's climatic conditions, even with COP15, COP16, COP17, so many COPs happened. But nobody is raising Tibet only because they're too afraid of China. And when your fear is gone, then you will realize that you are also in deep trouble. So before that happens, I think it's time to raise your voices against any kind of injustice, whether it's human rights or whether it's deprivation of water, because water and food are going to be major, major issues. That's why we keep saying, or sometimes people say, we are political refugees now. Yes, we are political refugees. But in future, if we are not careful, there will be so many environmental refugees that we will need to take care of. So before all this happens, I think this awareness, the reason for Saraswat ji and the Kuldeep ji, because they heard me speak in Delhi and they thought that it would be nice if I can speak about the historical aspect of Tibet for Indians to understand. And as much time as I find, I'll try to visit as many universities, because one person to reach out to the whole world and within India, it's quite a task. But wherever possible, we'll make the effort, and then my administration is also with me to take up these jobs. Thank you very much, Bharat Tibet Sangh. for organizing this. And I really look forward to working with you in the future. We have our India-Tibet Coordination Office lady responsible for coordinating with the Tibet Support Group. Thank you. And lastly, I want to tell you that His Holiness assures us many times that I may go to, if there are opportunities for him to go to China or Tibet, he will go, but he will not live there because there is no freedom. So His Holiness always says that now in the last few months, he has also been saying that when I die, I want to die with my Indian friends at my bedside, not Chinese friends on my bedside. And then His Holiness, I had an audience with His Holiness about a week ago, and His Holiness said that change will definitely happen in China. As Buddhists, we believe in impermanence. Western psychologists also copy that and say change is the only constant. So there will be change, there has to be change, there is no other way. But then His Holiness also says, I will live up to 110. So His Holiness, this Dalai Lama will live very long, but I also tell the Tibetans, the Lama has the wish to live. Now it's up to the disciples to make sure that His Holiness also keeps his decision consistent. Because if the disciples behave in totally different ways than how Lama thinks, then Lama might also think there's no reason for me to live long. So in that sense, I tell the Tibetans also, now you have to learn. There are a lot of our Ladakhi friends here who enjoy the similar culture, and they are very fortunate because every year His Holiness comes to Ladakh, and and I think there were also opportunities for Ladakhi students to meet with His Holiness here. So, thank you. Quite a number of them. I think the Jammu University, he also studied from here, no? The present Lok Sabha member of Ladakh also studied from University of Jammu. And when we were entering, thank you. And when we were entering into the campus, I immediately saw this Zorovar Singh auditorium. And then, because Zorovar Singh and Tibet, even though we enjoyed very good relationship with most of our neighbors, we had our skirmishes also with our neighbors, including Zorovar Singh. So Zorovar Singh was killed in Tibet, but he was also respected as a very valiant valor. So that relationship also was brought afresh in my mind as I was entering and all these histories were happening. So thank you very much for organizing this, and thank you for all the audience. Thank you very much.